She called my maintenance logs Paranoia on paper. I was the only engineer certified to keep 31 rides and 8 million visitors safe. Those were her exact words, delivered with a casual flick of her hand. She was sitting across from me in a conference room I had walked past 10,000 times, in a building I helped wire for power before the drywall even went up. She did not bother to make eye contact when she said it. She was looking at her phone, face up on the polished mahogany table. To her, the rest of us in the room were just notifications she would get to whenever something more interesting stopped pinging. It was October 14th, 2024. A Monday. The sky outside was a flat, heavy gray, the kind the mid-Atlantic gets in late autumn when the weather has no intention of doing anything dramatic. It just sits there, heavy and indifferent, just like her. My name is Gavin Vance. I am 56 years old, and until that Monday morning, I had spent 24 years as the man who made sure nobody fell. I need to back up to explain how I got there. I started turning wrenches on amusement rides when I was 17. It was a traveling fair circuit, the kind that set up in church parking lots on Friday afternoon and tore down late Sunday night. The safety inspection back then was whatever the operator remembered to check between cigarettes. I was just an apprentice. I carried heavy toolboxes, watched the older mechanics closely, and learned early on that gravity does not negotiate. A bolt is either tight or it is not. A weld holds or it fails. There is no presentation that can change the tensile strength of high-carbon steel. In 1990, I enlisted in the Coast Guard. I was rated as a machinery technician, an MK. I spent 6 years on 2 medium endurance cutters, maintaining diesel propulsion systems, high-pressure hydraulics, and fuel handling lines. Everything on a cutter that moves, burns, or pressurizes was my responsibility. I separated in 1996 as a petty officer first class. When you spend years in the machinery spaces of a ship, you learn to listen. You do not just listen to conversations, you listen to systems. A diesel engine running within normal parameters has a specific rhythm. A hydraulic pump cycling within tolerance has a distinct sound. When that sound changes, when a harmonic vibration appears where it should not be, you hear it before the gauge moves. You feel it before the digital readout catches up. I was on a cutter once when a hydraulic line ruptured. The digital warning screen in the control room said everything was fine. The sound of the pump said otherwise. We lost 32 gallons of hydraulic fluid in 11 seconds. I was already moving to shut the system down 4 seconds before the alarm even tripped because I had heard the pitch change. That is why I keep paper records. I do not hate computers. I just remember standing in a pool of hydraulic fluid while a screen full of green lights told me nothing was wrong. I joined Vanguard Theme Parks in 2001 as a senior ride technician. I was 33 years old. That was the year our first custom steel coaster, Steel Tempest, went vertical. It was a launched coaster with a massive hydraulic system that could propel a 12,000-pound train from 0 to 72 miles per hour in 3.8 seconds. I stood on the platform the first time they fired it. The pressure wave hit me right in the chest. Over the next 24 years, I worked every engineering position in the company. I climbed steel tracks in the summer heat and ran diagnostic codes in the freezing winter. I started night school for my professional engineer license in 2003, spending 14 years on coursework, correspondence programs, and long weekends at my kitchen table with textbooks and a calculator. I earned my PE license in 2007, registering with the Virginia State Board. I added North Carolina in 2009 and Pennsylvania in 2011, 3 state registrations, 3 regulatory boards that recognize my personal stamp for the specific custom ride classifications Vanguard operated. We had 31 complex rides across 3 states, drawing 8 million visitors a year and generating $8 billion in annual revenue. My PE stamp was on every single inspection report, every annual certification, and every compliance document. My name and my license number were the final word on safety. Not a department, not a committee, just me. They promoted me to Vice President of Ride Engineering in 2013. By then, I had been carrying the stamp for 6 years, and the title was just the company paperwork catching up to what everyone already knew. I managed a department of 7 dedicated engineers. We maintained our rides with a safety record that the Virginia board held up as the gold standard. but I lost my marriage for it. Sandra Vance, my wife, left me 11 years ago. She told me the parks came first, and she was not wrong. I was always there. I was always in a machinery space, climbing track sections, or on the phone at 11 p.m. because a sensor had tripped on a coaster in Pennsylvania, and I needed to hear the launch sequence over the phone before I could clear it for the next morning. Sandra said she did not want to compete with roller coasters for the rest of her life. I did not contest the divorce. She was right. She remarried 6 years ago. I live alone now in a modest house I bought in 2016. It has a linoleum floor in the kitchen that I keep meaning to replace, a harsh overhead light, and a notepad on the kitchen table where I work through engineering problems. The parks were my family, and the rides did not let people fall. That was the trade. Then Olivia Thornton arrived in February 2024. She was 26 years old, hired as the Chief Innovation Officer, a title her father, Charles Thornton, created for her. Charles, the founder and CEO of Vanguard, was 58. He had been a real operator once, but now he was separated from his own company by a board of directors, a CFO, and a daughter he could not say no to. Olivia had a Kellogg MBA and 9 months of guest experience consulting, which in reality meant she had led a mobile app redesign that launched with a 2.3-star rating. She listed it on her LinkedIn as digital transformation leadership. She had no engineering background and no safety credentials. During her first week, she walked into my office and asked why our maintenance logs were printed on paper. I explained the safety redundant physical trail. She just nodded with that blank expression people use when they have already decided you are wrong. She wore sharp, structured blazers and smelled of expensive perfume. She kept her phone face up in every meeting. Her vocabulary was a closed loop of buzzwords: guest-first culture, availability optimization, friction reduction, and agile maintenance. She used the phrase legacy mindset like a weapon. 3 days before she fired me, Travis Albright pulled me aside. Travis had been on my maintenance crew for 22 years. He was 41, quiet and competent. He was the only other person who understood the hydraulic override sequence on Steel Tempest without looking it up. Gavin. She said it. In the executive meeting last week, Travis told me, his voice hushed. She called our maintenance department a cost center with paranoid leadership. She had a slide showing our safety downtime. She called it legacy friction. I did not say anything. I went back to my office, opened the top right drawer of my desk, and looked at my stamp. The round embossing stamp with the worn wooden handle. I had carried it since 2007. It was the physical tool that made my signature legally binding. 3 days later, she dissolved my department. The official reason for my termination was read from a printed sheet by Sarah Jenkins, the director of HR. She stood rigid in the doorway of the conference room, her hands pressed flat against the wood frame, as if she expected me to throw something. The paper in her hand trembled slightly. The corporate script charged me with creating a culture of over-maintenance that limits ride availability. Olivia Thornton sat across the table, her phone face up, her white teeth showing in a cold, artificial smile. "I know this feels disruptive, Gavin," Olivia said, her voice smooth and devoid of any real empathy. "But at this stage of a career, most people are already thinking about transitions. We are just formalizing what the data was going to tell us anyway." She spoke about my career as if she were describing a worn-out conveyor belt, something to be decommissioned and sold for scrap. She asked if I had any questions. "Just one," I said, keeping my voice flat. "Is the professional engineer stamp in my top drawer considered company property or personal equipment?" Olivia looked blank. She had no idea what the stamp even was or why it mattered. She waved her hand dismissively. "Take whatever personal items you need. I packed 24 years of my life into 3 cardboard boxes." The stamp did not go in a box. I slipped it into the breast pocket of my jacket. I could feel the cold, heavy circle of the brass plate pressing against my chest as I walked down the long corridor for the last time. Travis Albright was standing near the exit, watching me. I stopped next to him for a brief second. "Do not sign anything they put in front of you, Travis," I said quietly. He nodded once, his eyes tight with worry. I walked out to the parking lot, loaded the boxes into the bed of my Tacoma, and sat behind the wheel. The engine was off. The afternoon sky was the color of wet cement. I did not slam the car door. I did not make a single angry phone call. I just put my hand over my breast pocket, felt the solid weight of the stamp, and turned the key. I got home at 4:47 p.m. It was the first time in 2 decades that I had pulled into my driveway while the sun was still up on a weekday. The kitchen light was harsh when I turned it on. I set the boxes on the linoleum floor and left them sealed. I hung my jacket on the hook near the door, the stamps still inside. I poured a glass of water and sat at the kitchen table. The notepad was there, the pen resting beside it. I just sat in the silence of a house that had been quiet for 11 years, letting the reality of the situation sink in. At 11:40 p.m., I took a bottle of rum down from the cabinet above the stove. I poured a small measure into a short glass and set it next to the notepad. Then I reached into my jacket, pulled out the PE stamp, and placed it on the table. The wooden handle was worn smooth, polished by 17 years of pressure from my right thumb. It was a tool that had done its job 10,000 times without a single failure. I picked up my phone and called Bradley Higgins. Bradley was 54 years old, a regulatory attorney who had spent 12 years representing engineers in code compliance and liability matters. He answered on the second ring. His voice was steady, the sound of a man who knew the rules inside and out. "I heard Gavin," Bradley said. "Tell me exactly what happened." I gave him the facts. No emotion, no embellishment. The department dissolved, the termination language. My walk out of the building. When I finished, there was a long pause on the line. "Did you take your stamp?" Bradley asked. I looked at the brass plate on my table. "Yes. It is in front of me right now." "Then Vanguard is in massive trouble," Bradley said. "They just pulled the pin on a grenade and they are still holding the handle." Bradley did not need to explain the details. But he did anyway to make sure our legal footing was flawless. Under Virginia Code Section 3698.3, North Carolina General Statute Section 95-111.4, and Pennsylvania Amusement Ride Safety Act, a currently licensed professional engineer must sign and seal the mandatory annual inspection reports before any state board will issue or renew an operating permit, Bradley explained. Vanguard's 31 custom-designed rides fall under specific engineering classifications that require a PE with matching endorsements. You are the only licensed PE on file with all 3 state boards for those rides. There is no backup. The existing inspection reports expire 90 days from their issuance. Most of yours were signed in late July and early August. That means the window closes in late October through mid-November. The state boards will identify the compliance gap before Thanksgiving. I took a sip of the rum. "How long do we have?" "About 30 days, Bradley said. Virginia will move first. Their board is the most aggressive. North Carolina and Pennsylvania will follow once Virginia issues the notice. It could be the same day or 36 hours behind. Gavin, do not call them. Do not answer if they call you. If they want to discuss terms, they talk to me. We make one polite offer to show good faith, and then we go completely dark." "I understand," I said. "You built those rides," Bradley added. "Your stamp is on every document those boards have. They are not going to forget you just because a CEO's daughter with a marketing degree decided you were friction." I hung up. I sat in the harsh light for a few minutes, put the stamp back in my pocket, and went to bed. The next morning, I left a single polite voicemail with Vanguard's HR department. My voice was calm and measured. "This is Gavin Vance. I would be happy to discuss re-engagement on appropriate terms. Please have your legal representative contact Bradley Higgins. He is listed in the Virginia Bar Directory." Vanguard did not call Bradley. On October 17th, 3 days after I was fired, I received a call from Richard Dunlap. Richard was 57 years old and the CEO of National Ride Engineering, the largest independent PE firm for amusement ride certification in the country. He had tried to recruit me 4 times over the last decade. "Gavin, I heard the news," Richard said without preamble. "I am offering you the Chief Safety Officer position, a $28 million equity and compensation package over 5 years, and a clause confirming you will personally consult for any regulatory body reviewing Vanguard's recertification." I looked at the notepad on my table, where I had written the number 30. "Send the contract terms to Bradley," I said. "Already done," Richard replied. I signed the offer letter on November 15th. But before that, the 30 days had to run out. During those 30 days, I did the most devastating thing a man in my position could do. I did absolutely nothing. I did not answer Vanguard's calls. I did not respond to the urgent emails from Olivia Thornton's assistant requesting knowledge transfer documentation or copies of my old digital safety logs. I did not pick up when unfamiliar numbers with the local 804 area code rang my cell phone at 8 a.m., noon, and 5 p.m. I documented every single call in the notepad on my kitchen table. I wrote down the date, the time, the number, and the duration of the ring. I sent the complete log to Bradley Higgins every Friday. Instead of worrying about the park, I drove my Tacoma to the local hardware store. I bought a pack of rubber washers and fixed the kitchen faucet that had been dripping since July. I cleared the overgrown brush along my back fence and stacked 3 cords of firewood, working slowly under the cool gray October sky. I sat on my back steps with a mug of black coffee, listening to the wind in the trees. I realized I could not remember the last time I had experienced silence. It was a strange, heavy feeling, but it was peaceful. The silence was the weapon. I had walked out the door with 24 years of institutional knowledge, the hydraulic pressure tolerances of 31 custom rides, and the specific vibration signatures of every launch motor memorized. The young woman who had dismissed me as legacy friction did not even know what questions to ask. On November 13, 2024, a Wednesday, the 30 days expired. A manager named Brent Fletcher was sitting at his desk in the Vanguard Operations Center when the email arrived from the Virginia Department of Labor and Industries, Amusement Ride Safety Division. He opened it casually, one hand on his coffee mug. He read the first paragraph, set the mug down, and read it again. The third time he read it, his hand was shaking as he reached for the phone. The notification was clear. Under Virginia Code Section 3698.3, Vanguard Theme Parks was ordered to immediately suspend operations of all fixed-site amusement devices pending the submission of current annual inspection reports bearing the signature and seal of a licensed professional engineer with the appropriate ride classification endorsements. Without a valid PE certification, the state permits were void. Fletcher called Olivia Thornton's office. He got her voicemail. He called her assistant, who told him Olivia was in a strategy meeting regarding the spring marketing campaign. The spring marketing campaign for parks that were about to be legally locked down. Fletcher bypassed her and called Charles Thornton directly. Charles was on a golf course in South Carolina. "Charles, we have a catastrophic compliance issue," Fletcher said, his voice tight. He read the state's letter word for word. The silence on the other end of the line was so long that Fletcher thought the call had dropped. "Get Olivia," Charles finally said. "She is not answering her phone," Fletcher replied. "Kind her," Charles ordered. The next morning, the North Carolina board issued its suspension notice. Pennsylvania's letter arrived 36 hours later. 3 separate states, 3 regulatory agencies, all delivering the same message. Without a licensed PE signing off on the safety documentation, the gates must remain locked. Effective immediately, all 31 rides were shut down. The news hit the trade publications on November 14th at 6:47 a.m. When the stock market opened, Vanguard's stock gapped down. It closed the day 42% below its previous value. Industry analysts wrote scathing reports, calling the situation an existential regulatory exposure and a catastrophic leadership failure. One analyst wrote that Vanguard had fired its only certified safety authority and was now shocked that the law required a certified safety authority. That afternoon, Olivia Thornton called my cell phone. I was sitting at my kitchen table, drinking coffee from the pot I had brewed at dawn. I looked at the screen and recognized her number. I did not answer. The phone rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I wrote the detail in my notepad. November 14, 2:15 p.m., Thornton O. cell, no answer. Over the next 3 days, Vanguard Extensions called my phone 23 times. The legal department, the office of the CEO, Brent Fletcher, and even Olivia's assistant all left messages. I ignored every single one of them. In their panic, Vanguard's management team made a fatal mistake. At the operations center, Olivia sat at a table covered in compliance folders with Fletcher and their legal team. They had a stack of unsigned inspection reports for the upcoming quarter. "We need these filed today to lift the suspension," Olivia said, tapping her pen on the table. "Cannot we just copy Gavin's signature block and use the digital stamp from the July filings?" "It is just a renewal," Fletcher stared at her in disbelief. Olivia, that is a physical embossing stamp. It leaves a raised seal on the paper. We do not have the physical tool, and using his name without his authorization is a direct violation of the law, but Olivia was desperate. She ordered a junior administrator to scan my previous signature, digitalize the seal, and print a set of temporary safety certifications. They submitted these documents to the Virginia Department of Labor and Industries on November 16th, claiming they were duplicates of signed papers that had been misplaced. They did not realize that the state inspectors are not stupid. The board's lead investigator noticed the flat, printed seal instead of the required raised embossment. Under Virginia Code Section 18.2-172, forging a public record or an engineer's stamp is a Class 4 felony. The investigator immediately flagged the document and called Bradley Higgins to verify if I had authorized the signature. Bradley called me immediately. Gavin, they just submitted forged compliance documents with your signature and stamp to the Virginia board. They are trying to bypass the safety suspension. I sat at my kitchen table, my jaw tight. I did not sign anything. I have the physical stamp right here in my drawer. Good, Bradley said, a cold edge in his voice. We are reporting the forgery to the state police and the Board of Department of Labor and Industries. This is no longer just a compliance issue. It is a criminal investigation. The regulatory hearing in Richmond was scheduled for early January 2025. It was held in a second-floor room of the state office building under buzzing fluorescent lights. There was no mahogany paneling or plush carpeting, just linoleum floors, folding chairs, and a long dais where the 4 members of the Virginia Amusement Ride Safety Review Panel sat behind microphone stands and nameplates. Vanguard's legal team occupied the entire left side of the room. They had hired 3 local attorneys from Richmond and 2 high-priced partners from a prominent D.C. litigation firm. They had brought 6 large cardboard file boxes, their lids stacked neatly underneath, with color-coded index tabs sticking out. Every page in those boxes was my own work, annual inspection reports I had stamped, stress analysis sheets I had calculated, and maintenance manuals I had written. They had brought my career to use as a shield, not realizing it was about to become their indictment. I sat on the right side of the room at a small witness table. I had no team of lawyers, just Bradley Higgins sitting quietly in the second row of the gallery with his arms crossed. On the table in front of me, I placed my professional engineer license. The wooden handle of my embossing stamp was visible in the breast pocket of my jacket. I had not been asked to produce it, but its presence was felt. The panel chair, Dr. Diana Barlow, called the session to order at 9:15 a.m. She stated that this was a regulatory compliance review to address the safety permits for Vanguard's 31 rides. Vanguard's D.C. attorney, Stephen Barrett, stood up. He argued that the safety suspension was an excessive administrative barrier that threatened the local economy. He claimed that Vanguard had hired an independent engineering firm to review the systems and that the state should accept their general safety sign-off. Barrett, the board regulations are very clear, Dr. Barlow said, cutting him off. Custom amusement devices require a certified professional engineer with specific ride classification endorsements. Does your independent firm have an engineer with those registrations on file? Barrett cleared his throat. We are working on securing those credentials, Madam Chair. But in the meantime, we believe the safety protocols established by the previous management are sufficient to protect the public. Dr. Barlow turned her attention to me. Mr. Vance, you authored these safety protocols. You spent 24 years managing these specific installations. The board would like to hear your professional assessment of the current safety status of the rides. I leaned forward, speaking directly into the microphone. My voice was calm and steady, the same tone I used when explaining a stress fracture to a junior mechanic. These 31 rides are not off-the-shelf attractions, I said. They are custom-engineered machines. Steel Tempest, for example, operates under immense hydraulic pressures and structural loads that are calibrated to the specific soil conditions and thermal expansion rates of its site. The safety protocols I wrote were built on 2 decades of daily physical inspections and data logging. I paused, taking a slow sip of water. The room was completely silent. Since my department was dissolved on October 14th, These rides have operated without a certified professional engineer overseeing their maintenance, I continued. In addition, the board has documented an attempt by Vanguard's current management to submit forged compliance reports bearing my signature and my registration number, a direct violation of Virginia Code Section 18.2-172. Because of this breach of trust and the total lack of qualified oversight, we have no reliable data on the current structural integrity of these machines. I looked directly at Stephen Barrett, then turned back to the panel. My professional recommendation is that the state boards maintain the safety suspension until a comprehensive structural audit is performed on all 31 rides. This audit must include non-destructive testing on every load-bearing weld, a complete teardown of the hydraulic systems on the launch coasters, and a full verification of the control software against the original design schematics. Dr. Joseph Henderson, the structural engineer on the panel, leaned forward. Mr. Vance, what is the estimated cost and timeline for an audit of that scale? Based on current industry rates and the availability of specialized testing crews, the audit will cost approximately $190 million, I said. The timeline is 4 to 6 months for the Virginia rides, with North Carolina and Pennsylvania running concurrently once the initial baseline is established. Barrett stood up, his face red. Madam Chair, this is absurd. This is a vindictive estimate from a disgruntled former employee who is trying to destroy the company that let him go. Dr. Joseph Henderson looked at Barrett over his glasses. Mr. Barrett, Gavin Vance is the engineer who built these systems. His stamp is the only reason these rides were allowed to open in the first place. When he tells this board that a full audit is required to guarantee public safety, we listen. Especially when your client is currently under investigation for forging his signature to bypass our inspections. The panel recess lasted only 15 minutes. When they returned, Dr. Barlow announced their decision. The panel voted unanimously to adopt my recommendation. The safety suspension would remain in place until a $190 million structural audit was completed and certified by a licensed PE. North Carolina's board adopted the same standard the following week. Pennsylvania followed 3 days later. The gates stayed locked, and the $190 million clock was ticking. The forced shutdown was a slow, agonizing death for Vanguard theme parks. A seasonal closure is simple. You winterize the equipment, lay off the seasonal staff, and keep a small crew to watch the property. But a safety lockdown by the state is a different beast entirely. You must maintain the rides at operational readiness for inspection, pay property taxes, service hundreds of millions of dollars in debt, keep high-voltage utilities running, and pay the salaries of permanent staff. All while generating exactly $0 in revenue. Between November and March, Vanguard burned through $340 million in cash reserves. The holiday festivals and spring break crowds, which usually carried the company's profit margins, were completely gone. The visitors simply took their families to rival parks. The credit rating agencies downgraded Vanguard's debt to junk status in January, triggering default clauses in their agreements with 3 major banks. Olivia Thornton's boastful LinkedIn posts about digital innovation and guest-first efficiency became a public joke. The comment sections were filled with people asking why the gates were locked. She deactivated her account on November 19th, but the damage was already done. In early February 2025, Charles Thornton was forced to fire his own daughter. Her termination was announced in a brief SEC filing under executive transitions. The position of Chief Innovation Officer was eliminated entirely. Olivia left the office in a rideshare vehicle, her leased luxury car, repossessed by the dealership a few days later. But the board of directors was not finished. A group of institutional shareholders filed a lawsuit against Charles Thornton and the board for breach of fiduciary duty. Under corporate law, directors have a strict duty of care to protect the company's assets. By dissolving the safety department, firing the only licensed engineer, and allowing the forgery of compliance documents, Charles had committed gross negligence that resulted in corporate waste. The board voted to remove Charles Thornton as CEO on February 20th. His life's work was gone, destroyed by the arrogance of the daughter he could not control. In April 2025, National Ride Engineering stepped in. Led by Richard Dunlap, The firm acquired Vanguard theme parks at a 68% discount to its original valuation. The company that had been valued at $2.7 billion was sold for a fraction of that amount, its value gutted by 5 months of silence. I was part of the acquisition team. I sat on the buyer's side of the conference table, looking at the same corporate lawyers who had tried to call me a disgruntled employee 3 months earlier. They did not look at me. They kept their eyes on their legal pads, signing the paperwork that transferred ownership of the parks to Richard Dunlap's firm. My first act as Chief Safety Officer of the new Vanguard operations was to personally oversee the safety recertification. I did not rely on checklists or computer models. I spent 4 weeks climbing the steel track of Steel Tempest, listening to the hum of the hydraulic pumps and checking the welds on all 31 rides. I signed my name and pressed my PE stamp onto the bottom of each compliance report. 31 documents, each bearing the raised brass seal in the lower right corner. On May 15, 2025, the gates opened. The visitors returned, and the rides ran safely, just as they always had when they were maintained properly. On my first morning in my new office at National Ride Engineering, I arrived before the sun came up. The sky outside was that same heavy flat gray that had hung over the Mid-Atlantics since the day I was fired. I stood at the window for a few minutes looking out at the city. I was not thinking about Olivia Thornton or her father Charles. I was not thinking about the stock price or the $340 million they had burned. I was not even thinking about the quiet kitchen in my house or the years I had spent working late nights. I was thinking about the sound a launched coaster makes when the hydraulic valves open and the train hits the track at 72 miles per hour. It is a clean, sharp sound. A sound that tells you the steel is holding, the pressure is stable, and the machine is doing exactly what you built it to do. I sat down at my desk, opened the top right drawer, and reached into my pocket. I took out my PE stamp. The wooden handle was cool in my hand, smooth where my thumb rested. I set it inside the empty drawer. I did not close the drawer immediately. I just looked at the tool sitting there, right where it belonged. Then I pushed the drawer shut. People in corporate boardrooms like to say that everyone is replaceable. They write it in business school textbooks and repeat it at leadership seminars to justify cutting costs. And maybe that is true for the people who sit in offices and talk in buzzwords. But in the real world, the work is not just a line item. The expertise is not in the system. It is the system itself. One man's signature and one brass stamp can be the only thing standing between the lights coming on and the gates staying locked forever. Olivia Thornton thought 24 years of dedication was just legacy friction that could be optimized out of existence. It cost her father's company $340 million in cash, a 68% loss in value, and their entire reputation to learn the difference between a manager who talks about the work and the engineer who actually keeps the world safe. I carried the stamp carried everything.